the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Welcome back. The BBC reports peace talks are in parallel universe, says Ukraine frontline troops. While Moscow considers a temporary ceasefire, its military machine continues to press its advantage on the front line. Where's the disconnect between Western wishful thinking and hyperbole and reality? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze these events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is Russia has presented the U.S. with a list of demands for a deal to end the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine and reset relations with Washington. Is this a peace negotiation or negotiating the terms of surrender? My guest leads the Speaking Truth to Power section of Tell the Word, a publishing arm of the Ecumenical Church of the Savior in Inner City, Washington. He served as a CIA analyst for 27 years, from the administrations of John F. Kennedy to that of George H.W. Bush. His duties included chairing the National Intelligence Estimates and preparing the president's daily brief, which he briefed one-on-one to President Ronald Reagan's 5 most senior national security advisors from 1981 to 1985. He's also the co-creator of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. He is one of my favorite people, Ray McGovern. As always, Ray, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Wilmer. We've been doing this for a very long time.
We've been a very long time.
Yeah, let's see. Well, 22 years as I count them.
That's about right.
When you and I were saying that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, can you imagine how wrong we were about that, Wilmer? You and I were practically the only ones saying, we don't see them there. We don't think they're there. And, well, you know the rest of that story. So I'm glad to be back with you. These are really interesting times now, and even what's going on right now in Moscow is worth, I think, starting off with, if you'd like to.
Please do it. You are always ahead of the curve on this information. You said a little while ago there's breaking news, and I went scrambling trying to figure out what was breaking, and nothing's broken. So, Ray McGovern, what's the breaking news?
Well, Wilmer, I have my own sources.
I know you do. You ran the Russia desk for how many years at the CIA? 20 years?
Yeah, well, I was in one way or another, I was a Russian supervisor of Russian intelligence, and I did a lot of it myself. You need to know the language. You need to know something about media analysis as well as signals intelligence and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. Suffice it to say that it's never been quite so exciting. Whatever you think of Trump and the kinds of things he does domestically, or with respect to genocide, do not blanch before the word in Gaza. He clearly wants to work out a decent relationship with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So let's segregate this other stuff out. You know, Wilmer, that I hold no brief to Donald Trump. You know that my faith tradition cares about orphans, widows, refugees, and that we do justice by them first and foremost. So let's put that aside and let's look at what he's doing with respect to Putin in Russia. He wants to end the Ukraine war. I am convinced of that. Do all my colleagues agree? No, they don't. Do they see lots of evidence that he doesn't want to end the war? Of course they do. Why is that the case? Because he is unpredictable. He has his minions say crazy things, and then on occasion he says crazy things like, we're going to sanction them some more. You can't sanction them anymore, okay? But he's not to be taken seriously until we know, for example, whether this Wall Street developer, Steve Witkoff, okay, gets finished talking to Putin, which would be just around now. Was it? It's just about 10 p.m. Moscow time. My impression is that they're both having a vodka, saying, okay, we understand each other. I will take that message back to President Trump, and you'll hear from President Trump, or why don't you call him tomorrow, okay? So what does this mean? Who's Steve Witkoff? Well, he's a Wall Street guy who Trump is using as a tough negotiator. What is he famous for? For going to Tel Aviv and saying, I need to speak to Mr. Netanyahu tomorrow. And he's told, oh, no, tomorrow's the Sabbath. You can look, I don't care about the Sabbath. I'm going to speak to Netanyahu tomorrow. You got that? And when he speaks to Netanyahu, he says, we need a ceasefire. There will be a ceasefire. And so we got a ceasefire. Now, Netanyahu figuratively was saying, wait a second, I have to pray a little. It's a Sabbath, but okay, what do you have to say? Well, sit down and shut up. This is what I have to say, says Witkoff. I wasn't a fly on the wall, but that's the way it went down, okay? Now, is Witkoff going to say that the same kind of deal to Putin? No way. Witkoff's going to come in and say, now, these flunkies that we have as our negotiators, what's the guy, Marco Rubio? Yeah, I know him. I sat with him a couple of times. Yeah, he was the governor of Florida. He knows nothing about nothing. Now, here's the deal, okay? They came up with this, the Ukrainians and the Americans, with this ceasefire proposal. Now, we know you've already said no go. That's not a go, okay? So what do you think? Well, Putin is telling him, or has just told him, what he thinks. But before that, Putin's main man on this issue, a guy named Ushakov, got on Russian radio this morning. What did he say this morning? He said, look, this is crazy. This is simply giving the Ukrainian army guys a 3-day respite so they can rest and recreate and come back to the war. Forget about it, okay? That's what Ushakov said. And now Putin. Well, he took care to meet with Lukashenko, his closest ally to the west, that's Belarus. His closest ally to the east is a bigger guy, Xi Jinping. So he met with Lukashenko, and they came up with a kind of a press conference afterwards. And Putin says, look, we think that a ceasefire is a terrific idea, okay? But now the Russians have this word, adnaka. Adnaka. That is, means however, or but, or nevertheless. So adnaka, what does he say here? He says, get my pieces together here since it was really breaking.
Well, while you're looking for that, let me add that Russia has gone through this whole peace negotiation before as it relates to the Minsk Accords, and they've sat through this this negotiating process with Angela Merkel, and I don't remember who, Milan from France and others, and only to find out that that the whole deal was a scam in order to enable Ukraine to, as you just pointed out, rest and rearm itself so that they could live to fight another day. So it's not as though President Putin is pulling this out of thin air. He's saying, been there, done that, seen this already, not going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe trick again.
Yeah, what Putin has said really, and what he said at this press conference just about 3 hours ago now, is look, yeah, ceasefire is great, but the devil is in the details, okay? Now, it's got to be part of a enduring situation which recognizes our security interests, our core interests.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing about why Ukraine can't be part of NATO. I mean, that's our big deal. And of course, Putin has already acknowledged the fact that even Trump has said, you know, I can understand why Putin feels so strongly about Ukraine being in NATO. Yeah, I understand that. Whoa, that's 80% of the problem right there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what does Putin also say? He says, oh, yeah. Let's talk about a 30-day ceasefire. Adnaka. But, okay, will this be used to train up units, to resupply units, to give the Ukrainian army a respite of 30 days? Is that what this would be used for? How would it be guaranteed? Who would organize it? These are all serious questions, says Putin in this press conference. Who will give the order to stop hostilities? And who will determine where and when there were possible ceasefire violations over this 2,000-kilometer border? So, says Putin, we don't close ourselves off to anybody who's going to talk about these things, but that's what we need to talk about. Not just a blithe ceasefire to give everybody a respite. Now, the other thing he says is, you know, maybe I should call Trump and talk to him about this. Well, yeah, that's going to happen. That's going to happen probably not today, but tomorrow after Trump has his coffee or his Diet Coke. And so they're going to talk about it. So my main line here is just to say, don't be deceived by neophytes, by sophomores like Rubio, or this guy Kellogg, General Kellogg, who says extraordinary things. You know, I'm reminded of Alice in Wonderland, you know, when she protests to the Queen of Hearts and says, you know, it's really hard for me to believe in possible things. And the Queen of Hearts comes back and says, now, Alice, you just need a lot of practice. As a matter of fact, I believe 6 impossible things before breakfast.
Well, you know, and Ray, contrast that to the previous administration and the directive by the president to Tony Blinken, or maybe it was Tony Blinken to the president. If Russia calls, don't answer the phone. How do you reach any type of settlement if you're not talking to your adversary?
Well, they didn't want a settlement. The whole deal, of course, was to weaken Russia. They're going to weaken them with sanctions. Okay. Now, back in the day, we had some really good economists working on the Russian economy. When they were allowed to say what they thought, they showed that it was very, very weak indeed. It could implode. But that didn't get through to our betters, William Casey, the director, and Bobby Gates, our head of analysis. So anyway, there were some good economists. Now, who decided that it would be a really good idea to impose unprecedented economic sanctions on Russia? That grandma, I'm a grandpa, so I can say this, Grandma Janet Yellen. What does she know about? Oh, she knows how to print money. She was she was a treasury person. Does she know anything about the Russian economy? Well, no. So who did Biden let decide about these sanctions? people like Yellen went behind the, oh yeah, Russia, Russia's weak. Russia's just, you know what Russia is? President Biden, it's a gas station posing as a country. That's what Russia is. So yeah, sanctions will do it. Putin will fall. It's just a matter of months, maybe years. Well, that didn't work out. Who has the most healthy GNP in Europe now? Russia. Did the ruble, was it made into rubble as Biden suggested was going to happen? No, actually, the ruble is pretty damn strong. Who's imploding? Western Europe, largely thanks to the United States. So all I'm saying here is that these crazy notions that, oh, we'll put in more sanctions. Well, Putin notes in his press conference today that, we've been told that Western companies want to come back now into Russia. And, they're welcome. As a matter of fact, Putin uses the English word, welcome, very welcome, okay? But, we've had our own indigenous capabilities, a Mac burger is called something different now, and we make them better, more tasty, or we make them cheaper. So yeah, come on in and try to get back your market share. But realize is we're not going to kick out our own indigenous people now in favor of you. So yeah, come on in. We welcome. But he's riding high, and so is Lavrov. Lavrov being the foreign minister. And a most unusual situation just 3 days ago, Foreign Minister Lavrov, who's been foreign minister for about 20 years now, and is a real pro. He gave an interview to my friend Judge Andrew Napolitano and Larry Johnson.
Phenomenal interview.
It's an hour and a half.
Phenomenal interview.
And it exudes confidence on the part of Lavrov. He actually has a kind of a sense of humor as well. I made some notes on some of the things he says. Trust is really important. And, when you violate trust, when you do kinds of things that aren't really on the up and up, well, that violates our conscience. And as for us, we have a conscience that's clear and pure on these things, like Minsk that you mentioned before. And it's clear and pure, not because we haven't used it very much, not because we seldom use it. We use it all the time, see? And then he's asked about Macron, whom he calls a liar. It's unusual. You don't usually have diplomats.
That's not diplomatic.
He lied about this, he lied about that, he lied about the other thing, okay? And then he says, but Macron is going to protect all of Europe with his nuclear umbrella. Right, says Lavrov. His 3 bombs. His 3 bombs. And if indignity were not enough, here's Lavrov referring to the head of the European Union, von der Leyen. Okay, now there's been a lot of fun made out of the lion. She is she's fond of lion, right? But he calls her Führer von der Leyen. Führer. If he wanted to be real particular, it was a Führerin, feminine, Führerin von der Leyen, as if she matters. Now, these guys don't matter anymore, except, well, what am I saying here? Let's be cautious here. Let's not get overblown. One French missile with a nuke on it can destroy a whole day, could destroy all of Europe. And Putin still has to contend with these admirals and these generals looking over his shoulder and say, look, Mr. Putin, has Trump not shown you yet how unpredictable he is? So you said he was unpredictable. You said jocularly that you prefer Biden because Trump was so... Well, you're seeing it here. And we, military, don't try to analyze American intentions. That's the job for our security analysts. We look at Russian capabilities, okay, American capabilities. And it's our job as military analysts They're still capable of doing crazy things. More so are the Europeans capable of doing crazy things. They seem to be out of their gourd right now. What are they going to do? What are they going to try to do before they accept the reality here? They live in a delusion. Who is it? Yeah, it was Lavrov. No, it was one of the high Soviet leaders, I think Russian leaders, said that there are a bunch of hacks at the top of the European leadership. They're going to learn the hard way if they don't come back to reality and realize that they have to deal with a wholly new situation, that the U.S. is not backing them up anymore. That's clear. Sacrifice Detroit for Potsdam or for Berlin. That was never the case. Right now, reality strikes. What Witkoff is able to get by the way of explanation from Putin prior to what I assume will be Trump's call tomorrow or the next day is going to be very interesting, because it's not going to be very different from what Putin said back in June of last year. Look, we want a pre-acknowledgement, no Ukraine in NATO. We want all those Ukrainian troops out of Donetsk province, which is now part of Russia, okay? And then maybe we'll talk about other things, but those are the two preconditions. We're not going to settle for less. And, you know, if you look at it in bold terms, the Russians have not only succeeded in capturing most of Donetsk as well as all of Lugansk, but they've surrounded, what is it, about 10,000 Ukrainian crackerjack troops in Kursk, in Russia proper? And Putin is asking yesterday, as he visits Kursk region, the command post, and talks to his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff equivalent, okay, Gerasimov, and he says, look, I understand that we have them surrounded in Kursk. I want this over. I want to finish that battle in Kursk quickly, as soon as possible. What does that mean? Well, Putin explains, look, they're surrounded. They don't have too many choices. They're encircled. Should we wait for an order from Kiev to say, okay, give up, it's over? Or do we have to do something else? Meanwhile, says Putin, there are mercenaries. There are people that really aren't part of the Ukrainian army. We've captured them. And just remember that under the Geneva Convention, they are not entitled to the same privileges of prisoners of war that regular Army or regular Air Force, Navy troops are. So just remember that. And there are lots and lots of thousands of them. They're surrounded. They can't get out. What are we going to do with them? So all this stuff is up and flow. It's never been more exciting. It's going to be interesting what Trump says to Putin in his next telephone call.
I think it's very important for people to understand that the Russian demands have been nothing but consistent. The points that he's been making, have been the 3 points that you've articulated have been the consistent points all along. The second thing I think that's important for people to pay attention to, they need to listen to the Lavrov interview. It's in English. And that to me was an incredibly telling element, was that there were no translators. Folks, you are able to listen to Sergei Lavrov speak very clearly, openly, and directly. And one of the first things, Ray, that he talked about was the whole LGBTQ issue and how that is impacting American politics. I thought that was very interesting. And also, I think, speak on these two things, if you would, please. One is this whole discussion about North Korean troops in Ukraine, because from what I've been told, they are actually from the Russian Republic of Tuva, if I pronounced it correctly. And they look Asian because they are Asian, but they are in fact Russian. Can you speak to that? And also, why is the EU still championing this war?
Well, on the North Koreans, no North Korean soldier has been captured. Many are said to have been killed, but how do you distinguish a North Korean from somebody from Tuva?
Tuva. That's how you pronounce it, Tuva?
I think so, but
okay.
That's from memory.
And folks need to know that Tuva is right near Mongolia. Right, it's on the border of Mongolia. So there's a reason why these people would appear to be Asian, because they are. But it's a Russian republic.
Wilmer, it's good to go back and figure out why this North Koreans are coming scare, okay?
Mm-hmm.
As I reconstructed, or as I actually thought at the time, I haven't really gone into it again. That was a time when F-16 fighter bombers, were being supplied to Ukraine, okay? And who had extra ones? The South Koreans. South Koreans. And could the South Koreans be persuaded to not only give some of their F-16s, but far more important, their pilots trained to fly these things to Ukraine to help them make some sense out of giving these sophisticated weapons to Ukraine? Could they be persuaded to do that? Well, we're going to give it a try, because we ain't got no pilots. South Korea has hundreds of them. Okay, so what happens? All of a sudden we get press stories about North Koreans going into Russia. North Koreans are going in. Oh, now they're 10,000. Now they're 15,000. All of them unconfirmed, right? Not a shred of evidence that they were there, okay? Mm-hmm. What was the game? It's Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. Oh, this is a good idea. Let's say lots of North Koreans in there so we can get the president of South Korea to tell his people, oh, we got to meet the North Koreans where they are and send our fighter pilots to Ukraine and all this stuff. Well, the whole thing imploded, among other things, when a dumb president from South Korea called martial law. Now he's under arrest, for God's sake. Mm-hmm. I think that's the kernel of this whole thing. That's why there are, quote, North Korean troops fighting and dying without ever showing who they really are, their ID card, so to speak. So that's kind of.
Well, wait a minute. When the story first broke about the North Koreans in Ukraine, they showed two guys and they had ID cards from Tuva.
Is that right?
And so I then went to, I think it's Occam's razor that says usually the simplest answer is the best answer.
Could be.
So if you've captured a guy with an ID card from Tuva, maybe he's from Tuva.
Yeah. Well, even Putin played along with this charade. Very early on, after a couple of weeks of these North Koreans coming into Russia, he was asked. The Western press says that there are satellite photos of these satellite photos of North Koreans. And Putin just laughed. Well, yeah. Well, if there are photos, we must take them seriously. Like that, So that's the North Korean thing. Right. What was the other thing you asked? I'm sorry.
Why is the EU still championing this conflict? Why do they still think following the U.S. prior to Trump down this rabbit hole is a good idea? I would think they would be applauding Trump, saying, thank you. Let's put an end to this mess and move on.
Well, because they're committed to a narrative. The narrative is not only is Russia trying to take all of Ukraine, but it won't stop there. Won't stop there, right? They'll go to Poland, they'll go to the Baltics. The next thing you know, they'll be on the English Channel, right? Now, those were wild-ass speculations, right? No, those were things that Biden said, right?
And never provided any evidence to support it.
Well, there isn't any evidence. In other words, people forget that there was a Russia that was very expansionist and that was very, very keen to move its ideology as well as its troops abroad. But I got news for you, that Russia imploded in 1987. I worked for 27 years to help cause that implosion, okay? I patted myself on the back and I retired in January of 1990 saying, way to go, Ray. There were other people involved, of course, right? Okay. But we had peace. And the fellow that I was closest to as a personal one-on-one briefing, Vice President George H.W. Bush, was talking even before the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989. He was talking months before in Germany about a new Europe, whole and secure from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Now, Wilmer, that was possible then. Mm-hmm. I think Bush, the first Bush, really thought of that and really wanted that. And the first thing he did after the Berlin Wall fell was he called up Gorbachev and he said, look, Mikhail, I'm not going to dance on the Berlin Wall, okay? You got problems. I'm not going to exploit them. Count on me. I'd like to get together with you right away because there's a whole bunch of disarray in eastern part of Europe. What do you say? Can you meet me at, say, Malta, 3 weeks? And Gorbachev said, sure. They meet in Malta, first week of December, 1989. George H.W. Bush says, yeah, I meant what I said. We want to work this out in a peaceful way. I still envision a Europe free and secure, whole and secure from Lisbon to Vladivostok. How soon can you see my Secretary of State, Jimmy Baker? How about early February? And oh, okay, all right. So Baker arrives in Moscow in early February. And this is the key. It's worth repeating. Baker said, he's a smart lawyer from Texas, right? Mm-hmm. So he says, Mikhail and Eduard, Shevardnadze, foreign minister, here's the deal. We would like a reunited Germany and... wait a second. Did we hear you right? Well, yeah. We'd like a reunited Germany. Well, wait a second now. Mr. Baker, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, we just lost 27 million Soviet citizens to a united Germany. If that's your quid, you better come up with a good quote. And so Jimmy Baker said, well, how about this? How would this be? If we promise not to move NATO 1 inch to the east, as long as you not only accepted a reunified Germany, but withdrew your 300,000 troops that are now in East Germany right quick. How would that be? Well, Wilmer, they went back, thought about it, fully expected to get the kind of economic aid that Poland was already receiving, thanks to the advice of Jeffrey Sachs and others. And they came back and said, okay, let's do it. Now, as most people know, that agreement was not written down just at the time as a bilateral agreement. And right. I had a chance to talk to one of Gorbachev's chief lieutenants. He's in all the photos. His name is Kuvaldin, professor now at Moscow State. I said, why wasn't that written down? This is about 5 years ago at some cocktail thing in Moscow. He says, well, Mr. McGovern, look, the two main reasons we always give is the Germans hadn't bought into that yet. We had to get their chop on it, okay? And the other thing is the Warsaw Pact was still there. I mean, it was premature to write anything down. And then he says, but Mr. McGovern, I can talk to you one-on-one. The real reason is we trusted you. I gulped, okay? Now that's key. That's why I thought I mentioned that yet again. Betrayals. That was the first big one. The next big one was trying to get Ukraine into NATO. The coup in Kiev that was arranged by Western security forces. It was the most blatant coup ever in world history because it was advertised 2.5 weeks before on YouTube. For God's sake. Listen to our ambassador in Kiev talking to Secretary of State for Eurasian affairs, Victoria Nuland. She said, "Well, we picked Yatsenyuk, and we got it all set. So everything's going to be." And the head of our ambassador in Kiev, Jeffrey Pyatt is his name. He went on to bigger and better things. He says, "But with all due respect, Miss Nuland, the EU, the European Union is not gonna like this." And she says, "F." I won't spell out the word. I don't know.
Right.
F the EU. Right. Now, one reason we know that 2.5 weeks before the coup, intercepted telephone conversation so authentic is because it took her 2 days to apologize for saying to the EU, "Oh, I didn't mean F the EU. No, I didn't mean it. Yeah, I said it, but I didn't mean it." So this is the history that Putin has inherited, and he can't trust. He's got to, if he figures out a way to make a deal on Ukraine, it will have to be doveraj, no proveraj. Trust but verify. Happily, there are all kinds of ways for intelligence collection devices to verify the most complicated of agreements. So that can be done if there's a will, I think, and I may be an outlier on this, but I think there's a will on the part of both Putin and Trump to get this behind them, to stop the Ukrainians and Russians from killing each other in Ukraine and get some peace, recognizing core interests of Russia here, where Ukraine will no longer try to get into NATO. It will be a neutral state, as was the case when it was established after the Soviet Union fell apart.
Two quick questions before we move on to the Seth Rich issue. First of all, Kevin Baptiste, thank you so much for that $20 super sticker. And Kevin asks, could Mr. Ray speak on the recent drone strike in Russia and the subsequent shipment of munitions in Odessa by the EU prior to the so-called ceasefire talks?
Well, there was a major drone strike on Russia. Most of the drones are said to have been intercepted. A big deal was made out of it, although Larry Johnson, my friend, was at one of the airports there that was still opening. He didn't hear a sound. The last report I saw yesterday was 4 people killed, maybe 10 injured. So we have to put this stuff into perspective. This is going on. Putin's not the kind of guy that's going to be knee-jerk reaction to this kind of thing. Okay. Now it's interesting that he did that. That is, that the Ukrainians did that on the very day that negotiations started between Rubio and those people that work for Zelensky. There are a lot of people that want to scotch all this, and that's what worries me. There could be a false flag. One of these drones could hit one of those nuclear power plants. It could be worse than Chernobyl. That's the real deal here. That's what the Russians are really worried about. And I share their concern because there's no way out for the European leaders, novices that they are, and pledged to this myth that Russia will take over. The important point here is, if somebody says, "All right, Ray, look, they're going to take over the rest of Ukraine." No, they're not. No, they can take over Poland. No, they're. How do you know that, Ray? Because they already stopped. What do you mean they already stopped? They stopped at March, April 2022, 6 weeks after the beginning of the invasion into Ukraine. What did they stop? they had a ceasefire agreement that could have ended the whole thing with saving up to 1 million service people on both sides. It's just incredible that the British and the U.S. put the kibosh on that ceasefire. That's well known. It's called the Istanbul Accords. It was initialed. The Ukrainian negotiators bemoaned loudly the fact that Boris Johnson came in with sort of hair like I have here and said, "No deal. If you do that, then we won't support you for as long as it takes." Well, it's as long as it takes now. That's the end of this chapter. Oops, got to fix my hair.
And other quick question, and this just came to mind as you were talking about George H.W. How would you rate him as a CIA director, and where were you in your career under his directorate?
Well, luckily, it was the mid-'70s. I was Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Western Europe at a very active time in Western Europe. When I say luckily, my boss was testifying on the Hill to try to help Bill Colby defend the agency against all manner of improprieties and other crimes. Okay, so I was acting. I worked directly under Bill Colby and then under George Bush. With respect to George Bush, it's hard to be objective because he's a friend of mine. He was.
Okay.
I couldn't persuade him to talk to his son and talk him out of going into Iraq.
Well, that was my next question. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I have the correspondence. He wrote, "Oh, I was afraid that the crazies, his handwriting, in quotes, the crazies would do my son in by having him do these crazy things into Iraq. But I have confidence in my son is up there. Well, I didn't remonstrate, but 3 weeks later, the crazies prevailed on his son." Okay.
Let the folks know who the crazies were.
Well, this is, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz,
Cheney,
and a whole bunch of folks, Douglas Feith in the Pentagon. It was really a matter of them and the Israelis, and the thirst for oil and the military thirst for permanent military bases. Those were the three factors that I coined, saying it was oil. O for oil, I for Israel, L for logistics, the permanent military bases. Now, nobody criticized me for saying oil and permanent military bases. But did I take it on the chin for saying Israel? Israel in that kind of context at a hearing in Congress. I learned that. I knew that beforehand. It was my only chance to say this on CNN, C-SPAN, and the rest of them.
Seth Rich, Joe Loria has a piece in. Before I get to that, let me just quickly remind people that if you want to see the Lavrov interview, which I strongly suggest you do, you can go to raymcgovern.org and you can see the whole interview at Ray's website, raymcgovern.org. And it is a phenomenal interview, the analysis of a number of things that Secretary Lavrov gets into. And he's speaking in English, which is, I think, phenomenal. So with that, Seth Rich, Joe Loria has a piece in Consortium News, more FBI foot dragging on Seth Rich files. And for those of you that don't remember, Seth Rich was the DNC's voter expansion data director. He was murdered in Washington, D.C., July 10th, 2016, 12 days before WikiLeaks released the DNC emails and 15 days before the start of the DNC convention. And if y'all remember, the whole Russiagate thing around the release of these files through WikiLeaks, it was blamed on Russian hacking, but there's a whole lot of evidence, and Ray was involved in this as well. It had nothing to do with Russian hacking. It had everything to do with Seth Rich. Ray, why is this still an important issue?
In brief, A whole generation of Americans has been brainwashed into thinking that Vladimir Putin is a devil incarnate and that his minions are just as bad. And that is precisely because he interfered with our election in 2016 and let his good friend, his bosom buddy, the fellow with whom he was having a bromance, according to Obama, who was in Putin's pocket, let him become president of the United States and defeating Hillary Clinton in a very corrupt way. That was the legend, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is that consequential? Well, about 4 months ago, I was deathly afraid that this clash in Ukraine, let's face it, between U.S. and Russian military machines was going to end up in a nuclear exchange. I had no confidence that these neophytes, Lincoln, Sullivan, Biden, to the degree he was still compos mentis, would not try something that would provoke a Russian nuclear response. That's how close. Now, I've been around a while. Perhaps you can tell, okay? But I've never seen it come so close. So that's why it's consequential. And it's rising again now when people are trying to say, Trump is giving the game away before it even starts. Look what he's doing. Okay, so it's happening now. That's why we have to get it straight. And the straight story is this. June 15, 2016, the months before the election. Julian Assange of WikiLeaks announces, we have emails relating to Hillary Clinton pending publication. Whoa, what did that mean? That meant to everyone who was paying attention that those emails would show that the DNC, Democratic National Committee, and Hillary's folks had tilted the playing field to such an angle that Bernie Sanders didn't have a snowball's chance in hell to win that nomination. Otherwise, in my view, she stole a nomination from Bernie Sanders, and the proof was in the pudding, and the pudding was these emails. So
it was Hillary Clinton and Debbie Wasserman Schultz that were the primary culprits here.
Right, and Wasserman Schultz and the two next leaders of the DNC resigned the day after WikiLeaks published these things. What does that tell you? Okay, so here's the date from. If you have a pencil, well, nobody has a pencil. If you have the keyboard, God, I can use this. So June 15th. Okay, what happens next? Oh well, July 10th, a person who worked at the DNC who had access to all these computers is shot dead on the streets of Washington, 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was an attempted robbery, except those robbers forgot to take his wallet or his watch or anything like that. They shot him twice in the back. He died an hour and a half later. His name was Seth Rich. Okay. Now, you didn't have to be a conspiracy theorist or even somebody who connects the dots real well like you do, Wilbur, to say, well, wait a second now. Emails from the DNC, maybe he had something to do with that. Well, that couldn't be. The legend was created by the security services, by the Democratic National Committee, and by the media that the Russians hacked those emails in order to defeat Hillary, gave them to WikiLeaks to publish, okay, where they were published 3 days before the Democratic National Convention. So what happens then? Well, the word goes out. The way we're going to handle that, my notion is that it was Jake Sullivan that came up with this brainstorm. Look, what we'll do now to deflect attention from what's in those emails is we'll blame it on the Russians. Hillary looks around. Anybody got a better idea? All right, we'll go with it. Okay. So the very day of the convention, they started blaming it on the Russians. Okay, the Russians. Okay. Palmieri, Jennifer Palmieri, who was PR chief for Hillary. She admits she went around in a golf cart at the convention to visit all the outlets selling this thing, and she complained bitterly. Nobody will believe it. They think we're too out of there. But then, according to Palmieri, when they got back to Brooklyn, Hillary's headquarters, then people from intelligence and reporters who good ties to intelligence were coming into, yeah, it was a Russian hack. We know it was a Russian hack. But that was August now, September. She was tearing her hair out. And then she said, finally, this is Palmieri, finally, the head of national intelligence, James Clapper, and Jay Johnson, who headed up the Department of Homeland Security, came out with a statement saying, yeah, it was the Russians. It was the Russians. It was the Russians. Okay. So now we had something to go with just a month before the election, and they played it to the hilt. So a little footnote here. Jay Johnson, who's a lawyer, he's sort of honest, and he in court testimony has said, Obama made us do this. We didn't have any forensic evidence. Obama said, go ahead anyway. It's October already. So your name of the game. Obama kicks out 35 Russian diplomats, confiscates Russian diplomatic property. It's all on the legends, okay? And so what happens? Well, they believe it. Everyone believes that the Russians hacked. Everyone. And then what happens? We find out, belatedly, that the House Intelligence Committee, headed by Devin Nunes, a Republican, who is actually interested in the truth about this, even though he was cast aside, he was able to arrange testimony from the head of the cyber firm named CrowdStrike, who was deputized by the FBI Director James Comey to do the forensics on the DNC emails. Got me? Okay, got you. Okay. So he's doing the forensics, and he is forced to testify. And Adam Schiff, who's just about to take over the committee, he says, okay, so Mr. Henry, his name is Sean Henry, tell me, how was it that the Russians hacked into the DNC computer, and when did they do that? And Mr. Henry, it's right in the testimony. His counsel reminds him, hey, you're under oath. You're under oath. So Mr. Henry says, there's no technical evidence that the Russians hacked into the DNC computers. There's no evidence anybody hacked into the material that was leaked was set up to be exfiltrated, but we don't have any evidence that it was exfiltrated. Well, what do my NSA former technical directors tell me about that? Well, that's clear. That stuff was set up to be exfiltrated, and then somebody with access to DNC computers put it in a little thumb drive and exfiltrated it, not on the internet, but put it in his pocket, gave it to Julian Assange. That's what happened. So the whole business about Russia hacking is a bald-faced lie. The only trouble is Americans don't realize that. Why? Because Adam Schiff hid that testimony for 2.5 years. When was it released? 2020. May 7th, 2020. How come you don't know about it? Because for some reason, the mainstream media missed the fact that in December of 2017, it was given the lie, this legend, that the Russians hacked into the DNC. Consequential? Yeah, it's consequential even today. Because as long as Americans remain brainwashed, and that's why I always welcome a chance to talk to you, Wilmer, as long as they remain brainwashed, they will be susceptible to this kind of manipulation that, Trump is still giving the whole store away. Why? Because he's got this bromance, this smart DNC romance with Vladimir Putin. It's all hogwash, and I have to say that when Trump says this is a hoax, well, I don't use that term. It's much more sinister than a hoax. It was blatant interference in a presidential election, and it wasn't the Russians. It was the Democrats with the media and with CrowdStrike and the deep state. And that, my friends, is pernicious. It's got to stop.
Final point on this. And I say this to people when I engage in this conversation, and they still can't grasp it. You, Ray McGovern, and a good friend of yours, William Bill Binney, tested the theory that the amount of data that was taken from the computer extricated, I think is the word you use,
Right.
could not be transmitted over the internet in the amount of time that they claim it was done. And the phrase I use is, it defies the laws of physics.
There you go.
And people can't grasp. Just quickly, if you imagine the internet to be a hose and you try to force 100 gallons of water through a 3-gallon hose, it's not gonna work.
Takes a long time. Yeah.
Takes a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
Can you just quickly explain to the audience, as the final point on what you've just made, about what I've just said?
Sure. Some of that stuff was downloaded at a speed that could be tolerated by a thumb drive, but not by being hacked or put on the internet. That's the basics of it. We found that out in July of 2017, and we wrote about it.
Mm-hmm.
And Patrick Lawrence wrote about it in The Nation, but The Nation was prepared to believe that Hillary was lying, so they cashiered Patrick Lawrence. The more important point is that in December of 2016, while Trump was still president-elect, we got together, and with two former technical directors of the NSA, one other high-level official, the materials that Ed Snowden brought out, slides, we could prove, applying the principles of physics, that it could not have been a hack, that it must have been an insider with an external storage device like a thumb drive. That's what it had to be. The date of that memo, we're very proud to say, is December 12th, 2016.
And didn't the NSA have a program already in place where they could make such allegations depending on the country that they wanted to target? That this was not something that just was pie in the sky, but that the NSA already had this I don't remember the name of it. Project Blue Marble or something like that.
You're talking about Vault 7 disclosures. Yeah. Right. They had lots of programs, active offensive cyber devices that do this kind of thing. Yeah, they're very talented folks, and they're getting paid big bucks at our expense to do these things.
Ray McGovern, thank you so much for your time today. Greatly, as always, Ray. You are so gracious when I reach out to you. We've been doing this for over 20 years. In fact, the story about you and Bill Binney came on my XM show when you all first wrote that memo, and we talked about it on that show.
Remember that? Yeah.
Yeah, we've been debunking these myths and slaying these dragons for a number of years. Ray McGovern, my dear friend, thank you so much, Ray. I appreciate it.
Most welcome, Wilmer.
Thank you. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. We need you all, please, to subscribe. We're trying to reach 10,000 subscribers. That will go a very long way in helping us do what we do every day. We do this for you, but we can't do this without you. So please just reach and click that like button and click that subscribe button so that we can get to 10,000 and keep this thing moving. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Oh, Dr. David Walalu is going to be my guest tomorrow. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful remainder of your day. I got to go now and grade exams. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.